So the Buddhas give various teachings with all kinds of aspects. I bow down to the mother of all Buddhas, together with the communities of hearers and Bodhisattvas. So this mantra, Tatyata Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhiswaha, which comes from the Heart Sutra that we just recited, so for beginners who are on the path to enlightenment, we are faced with numerous examples, numerous sufferings, miseries, problems. And many people come to me with lots of problems. Physical problems with their eyes, in their eyes, ears, and so forth. And then disabled people also come to me. But all these sufferings are because of the very fact that we have the psychophysical aggregates, or the combination of body and mind, which are the results of the origin of suffering, the negative emotions and karma and so forth. So if you wish to overcome this suffering, then the Buddha has actually asked whether this suffering is within the intrinsic nature of the mind itself or not. Of course, if it were intrinsically in the nature of the mind itself or the beings themselves, then of course we cannot overcome them as such. But these sufferings, problems, and the negative emotions and the karmas that give rise to these sufferings are something which we can separate from the mind and actually eliminate it from our mind stream. And so, when we talk about the practice of the Dharma, the spiritual teachings, we are talking about making transformation within ourselves. And so, the fact of having freed your mind from negative emotions that state is called true cessation. And that comes through the practice of the path, which is referred by this mantra, Tatyata Gate Gate Paragate Paragate Parasangate Bodhiswaha. And the first Gate is the first path, which we have not yet arrived. But through our thinking, serious thinking and contemplation, and practice in meditation, then we will reach the path of accumulation, referred by the first Gati, which is called the path of accumulation. And within the context of the Mahayana path, once you have that, within the context of the general path, generally in Buddhism, when you have this genuine sense of wishing to be free, this determination and wish and the desire to be free from, a genuine wish and aspiration to be free from suffering, then you have reached the first path of accumulation. And within the context of Mahayana path, when you really have this genuine sense of wanting to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings, in other words, having cultivated and developed that of bodhicitta, the aspiration, this altruistic spirit of enlightenment, to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings, that is the path of accumulation of the Mahayana path. And with regard to the teaching pertaining to these practices, then we have the master, the Bodhisattva or Buddha Maitreya, commenting on the Prajnaparamita text, writing his 5 treatises, such as the Abhisamaya Alamkara, and which explains the implicit content of the path, the progression along the path leading to enlightenment. And then Master Nagarjuna has commented on the explicit content of the path, that of the teaching of emptiness, which are taught in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. And so these are the paths that we should cultivate to reach that goal of true cessation and make transformation within ourselves. So with regard to the path that we should cultivate, Aryadeva has mentioned in his 400 verses that in the beginning we should avoid avoid those of the non-meritorious actions, and then in the middle we should get rid of this notion or the clinging to some kind of an autonomous self, and then in the end we should destroy all distorted views. And such a person who can do this is a wise one. So in Master Nagarjuna's Ratnavali, Precious Garland, he talks about first attaining a higher rebirth, a good rebirth, and then on the basis of that to attain what is known as definite goodness, which is twofold. One is that of liberation from that of freedom or liberation from the negative emotions themselves, and then on the second stage is that of overcoming even the imprints left by them. And so accordingly, Master Aryadeva made his comment in the 400 verses, the verse that I just quoted. So we are saying the blessing for the tea first. So regarding the text that we are going to go through, a guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life, what it teaches is that of the definite goodness and of the full enlightenment, the omniscient state of Buddhahood is the final goal. And with regard to that, Master Nagarjuna has said, once for oneself and others, wishing for oneself and others, the highest unsurpassable enlightenment. If you wish to attain that, you need to cultivate the altruistic spirit of enlightenment. And this is the delineation point. I mean, this is the factor which delineates whether one will attain omniscient state of Buddhahood or not. And so if you have bodhicitta, and then you will attain Buddhahood. And if you don't have it, you won't. And then that of the compassion, which is the root of bodhicitta. And then he says the non-dual wisdom, these three. And so for bodhisattvas, they focus on enlightenment, Buddhahood, with their wisdom and with their compassion. They focus their mind on sentient beings. And so understanding of emptiness leads us to that goal of enlightenment, Buddhahood. Now, in order for us to have a good experience of genuine experience of compassion, we need to see suffering and be able to see that suffering is something that we can overcome. And you would have this sense of wishing for others to free others from suffering. And so Master Nagarjuna says that in order to attain Buddhahood or omniscient state, these three factors are indispensable: that of the spirit of enlightenment, the altruistic spirit of enlightenment or bodhicitta, and that of compassion, and the non-dual wisdom realizing emptiness. So yesterday, we finished the 4th chapter. Now I'm going to go through the 5th chapter. We begin at the beginning of the 5th chapter on page 35 in English. The Tibetan text is on 33, page 33. Those who wish to guard their practice should very attentively guard their minds. For those who do not guard their minds will be unable to guard their practice. So going against your practice or training or the monastic vows, it has to do with the mind. If you actually let your mind stray, let it be strayed by those of the negative emotions, then even if you may wear some monastic robes, that doesn't really mean to keep the precepts. And so you need to guard your mind in order to safeguard your precepts. In this world, unsubdued and crazed elephants are incapable of causing such harms as the miseries of the deepest hell, which can be caused by the unleashed elephant of mind. And so here, the most important factors to keep, to actually guard this mind is mindfulness and introspection, or alertness. And so these are the main factors to guard your mind. However, if the elephant of mind is firmly bound on all sides by the rope of mindfulness, all fears will cease to exist, and all virtues will come into my hand. Tigers, lions, elephants, bears, snakes, and all forms of enemies, the guardians of hell worlds, evil spirits and cannibals will all be bound by binding my mind alone, and it will all be subdued by subduing my mind alone. The perfect teacher himself has shown that in this way all fears as well as all boundless miseries originate from the mind, who intentionally created all the weapons for those in hell, who created burning iron ground, from where did all the women in hell ensure. The Mighty One has said that all such things are workings of the negative mind. Hence, within the three world spheres, there is nothing to fear other than that one, my mind. So we do not want suffering. Suffering is what we don't want. But the root of this suffering is the undisciplined mind. And therefore, as long as your mind is unruly, untamed, there will be suffering. And so even with regard to training on the path, the mind is the main factor that we should take care of. If the perfection of generosity were the alleviation of world's poverty, then since beings are still starving now. In what manner did the previous Buddhas perfect it? And so here, perfection of generosity means that you have perfected the sense of giving to others. It's this sense of giving that you have perfected, with which you cannot overcome the poverty of all sentient beings, just like that. The perfection of generosity is said to be the thought to give all beings everything. So the perfection of wisdom has to do with your mind. Therefore, with the fruit of such a thought, hence it is simply a state of mind. Nowhere has the killing of fish and other creatures been eradicated. And so here, this verse shows that of the perfection of moral discipline or morality. And so mainly you have to take care of the mind, and then with that you will be able to restrain yourself and restrain the physical and verbal actions as well. And so for bodhisattvas, the Mahayana Mahayanis, the main factor here to avoid negative actions within the context of the perfection of morality is that of to restrain extreme self-centered attitude. So this verse 11 is about morality, and then the next verse is about that of patience. So when you meet with or encounter beings who are unruly, who hate you, or have malicious thoughts, ill will against you, I mean, it's not about overcoming them as such, even if they may have ill will against you, but your own anger and hatred has to be overcome. That is the perfection of patience. Where would I possibly, so for example, where would I possibly find enough leather with which to cover the surface of the earth? Yet wearing leather just on the soles of my shoes is equivalent to covering the earth with it. Likewise, it is not possible for me to restrain the external course of things, but should I restrain this mind of mine, what would be the need to restrain all else? So what you need to do is to counter your own anger and hatred. And therefore, through this training, I mean, you will be able to, as you develop it further and further, you'll be able to show patience. Although the development of merely a clear state of concentration can result in taking rebirth in Brahma's realms, physical and vocal actions can so result when accompanied by weak mental contact. For example, in order to attain the the concentrations of the higher realms of existence, such as form and formless realms, you need to first develop the single-pointed concentration, and on the basis of that, then you need to be able to distinguish between the subtle experiences, the subtlety of those of the higher realms, formal and formless realms, and then the gross nature of the experiences within this desire realm, and then have the aspiration to develop those of the experiences, subtle experiences of the higher realms. The knower of reality has said that even if recitation and physical hardships are practiced for long periods of time, they will be meaningless if the mind is distracted elsewhere. So many of us do say that we do some retreat, and we would go retreat for like a few weeks or a few months and so forth. And we may do the called sets of 500,000, 100,000, 5 sets of 100,000 practices, such as prostrations and so forth. While doing prostrations, but mentally, of course, if you have a very clear vision or the visualization of this 35 Buddhas of compassion, and also be able to bring up the four, what are known as the four opponent powers, to overcome the negativities within yourself, that would be good. So what you need to do is, while doing some practice such as prostration and so forth, you need to be able to move within yourself, gain inspiration to do the practices further and so forth. Otherwise, it makes no sense. Even if you may say the verses of taking refuge and bodhicitta and so forth, if there's no change within your mind, it doesn't. Just reciting the lines will not help. And so Dignaga has actually said that the Buddha is someone who became an authoritative or a reliable person by developing that of compassion, and then giving rise to that of bodhicitta within himself. And then he is someone who has this aspiration to help others. And he became a teacher, and then Sugata, referring to that of the having overcome those of the negative emotions, and having the spiritual realizations of bodhicitta and so forth. So even if you may not have a very thorough understanding of these lines, if you have some understanding of what these lines mean, and then grow that of a firm faith in the Buddha, then that would help to carry on with your practice with determination, better determination and so forth. Otherwise not. So even those who wish to find happiness, overcome misery, will wander with no aim for meaning if they do not comprehend the secret of mind, the paramount significance of the Dharma. So here the secret of mind refers on the one hand to the very difficult practices of bodhisattvas, and on the other hand it can also refer to that of the true nature of the mind itself, which is the emptiness or selflessness. Whether we talk in terms of in the Dzogchen context or Mahamudra context, or the Sakya teaching of the union of clarity and emptiness, and also in the Gelug tradition, that of the clear light mind, and this is all this has to do with the meditations with regard to these practices have to do with meditation on emptiness of the mind itself. And so when we come in the tantric practices, we come across this Om Svabhava Shuddha Sarvadharma Svabhava Shuddha Hang, so which actually refers refers to that of meditation on emptiness of our mind. So the emptiness of the mind is the property or the quality of the mind itself. And so the mind is focusing on its own true nature, which is emptiness. It's different from meditating on the emptiness of another object like a vase. But when you focus your mind on the emptiness of your own mind, I mean, that is much more powerful. And so if you do not comprehend the secret of mind, the paramount significance of the Dharma, this being so, I shall hold and guard my mind well. So this shows how we should guard our mind with mindfulness and introspection. Without the discipline of guarding the mind, what use are many other disciplines? Just as I would be attentive and careful of a wound when I miss a bustling, uncontrolled crowd, so I would always guard the wound of my mind when dwelling among harmful people. And if I am careful I'm careful of a wound through fear of it being slightly hurt, then why do I not guard the wound of my mind through fear of being crushed by the mountains of hell? So what these are teaching is that you need to show mindfulness and be mindful of what you're doing and what you should do and should not do. And also, while doing that, you should also check yourself whether you are being mindful of your practices. So for the monks and nuns, for example, you have left from home to homelessness. So nobody can force you. No, it's not an obligation for you to do good and avoid bad practices. It's up to you. So you should be able to, you should not be divorced from the sense of being a monastic yourself, and that you need to also observe your precepts and vows. So for that, mindfulness and inspection are needed. Should I behave in such a way as this, then whether among harmful people or even in the midst of women, the steady effort to control myself will not decline. So this is a reference to, this is a teaching to those of the monastics. So there was a tradition in the Nalanda monastic institution in the ancient time that the monk must lead a monastic bi-monthly confession session. And before that, there is also an overnight kind of a teaching for an overnight. And so Master Shantideva was actually someone who other monks found, or they saw him not doing any kind of monastic practices. And he was also someone who was not showing off what he was doing. And therefore, they wanted to actually make fun of him, the other monks of the monastic institution, and asked him to lead the monastic confession session, the bi-monthly monastic confession sessions. And so Master Shantideva, because he had clairvoyance, and he asked these people, should I teach something which has not been taught, or should I teach something that has already been taught before? And so they are something having not been, which was not taught in the previously. So he came out with teaching on this Bodhisattva Charya Avatara, Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life. And then another text that he wrote was that of Shiksha Samuchaya, which means a compendium of training or practices. And in this text, he refers to this text also. And when he was asked later on, when people found him somewhere else, where is this text? He said, it is in my room up near the roof, on top of the ceiling, or the beams inside. And so these two texts, the Shiksha Samuchaya and Bodhisattva Charya Avatara, are two texts that he wrote, and these two complement each other. What is not so elaborate and clear in one text is clear and elaborate in the other. And so these two texts became two main texts, part of the six texts, classic texts of the Kadam tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. And then the Master Abhisamaya Alamkara by Maitreya, and also the Bodhisattva Bhumi by Asanga are the two more texts of the six texts of the Kadam tradition. And so when giving this teaching, Master Shantideva sat on a throne that was set up for him in Nalanda monastic institution. O you who wish to guard your mind, verse number 23, I beseech you with folded hands, always exert yourself to guard mindfulness and alertness, or introspection. So he was being very humble when he says, I beseech you with folded hands. And so when we actually read these and think about it, we should really feel moved by his humility. and think of observing our precepts. People who are disturbed by sickness have no strength to do anything useful. Likewise, those whose minds are disturbed by confusion have no strength to do anything wholesome. So whatever has been learned, contemplated and meditated upon by those whose minds lack alertness. So verse number 25 read. So whether it's monastics or lay people, if your mind is unruly, you need to show mindfulness and this introspection. Even those who have much learning, verse number 26, faith and willing perseverance will become defiled by a moral fall due to the mistake of lacking alertness, the thieves of alertness and unalertness. In following upon the decline of mindfulness will steal even the merits I have firmly gathered, so that I shall then proceed to lower realms. So yesterday we covered the chapter on conscientiousness or paying heed, and today we are going through this chapter on vigilance or introspection. For the monastics, I would like to say that you need to always be aware that you are a follower of the Buddha. Therefore, I must not deceive others. I must not harm others. When you are about to do something negative that harms others, you should immediately restrain yourself, being mindful of the precepts, and therefore be untainted by this non-observance of your precepts and vows. So the factors to develop those of the mindfulness and alertness. So you need to rely on a master who would show you the path to avoid the negative actions in this life and consider the more important, the next life, than the more important than this life. So verse number 30. So in Tibetan communities, and we have those who are called lamas or tulkus, lamas and tulkus. And so I usually say that there is a four-part relationship between a lama and a tulku. So there are those who are lamas but not tulkus, or tulkus in the sense of reincarnated beings. And so those who who are qualified with the criteria of a spiritual master, like those of the 10 qualifications mentioned in Mahayana Sutra Alamkara, they may not be reincarnated tulkus, but they are lamas. And so such a master who are well educated, well learned and practiced, experienced in the teachings and so forth, although they may not have estates of a reincarnated tulku, they are lamas and not tulkus. Whereas there are those of the masters who are called, who were the lamas as well as tulkus, such as the masters, the first Dalai Lama, the second Dalai Lama, and so forth. And then the next two Dalai Lamas, as well as the fifth Dalai Lama. And regarding the sixth Dalai Lama, he was, of course, a great praised as a great master. But he, we could say that when he didn't serve the purpose of being in the lineage of the Dalai Lamas, being on the throne of the Dalai Lamas as such. Therefore, we could say that he was a tulku but not a lama. And so it's very important to have a qualified Lama or a spiritual master. So in Tibet, during some time ago, there were people who were not unqualified as spiritual masters. More than 20 years ago, I met one Chinese from mainland China who told me that Tibetans who proclaim to be Dharma Rajas, Dharma kings, came to China proper. And the Chinese devotees went to them, and they're trusting that they were real teachers. But in the end, what they found was that these so-called Dharma Rajas had come to China proper for women and money. And he asked me if I could do something about this. And I told them that I cannot do anything from here, being in India, but you, the Chinese people, need to check whether these people, the so-called Dharma Rajas, qualify as spiritual masters or not, whether they have these qualifications or not. If they do not qualify, then they should be left aside. So it's not right just to say, oh, this is a Lama, therefore we must respect him and bow to him. But you really need to check the Lamas. If you really want to be a qualified disciple yourself, you need to actually check the Lamas themselves, whether they are qualified or not. And so you need to have the practice that a qualified Lama should have the three qualifications of what are known as the three trainings, training of morality and so forth, for which you actually need to understand what suffering is, and you need to be have the aspiration to go out of this suffering. I am ever dwelling in the presence, verse number 31 on page 39, of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who are always endowed with unobstructed vision. By thinking in this way, I shall mindfully develop a sense of shame, respect and fear. So also during this recollection of the Buddha will repeatedly occur. So Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are the ones who always consider these suffering sentient beings as if they are like their own only child. So if you really have this sense of respect and fear of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, then you will not do negative things behind scenes. With mindfulness is set with the purpose. When mindfulness is set with the purpose of guarding the doorway of the mind, then alertness will come about, and even that word which had gone will return. So when, just as I'm about to act, I see that mind is tainted with defilements, at such a time I should remain unmovable like a piece of wood. And so this is showing that you need to show introspection. So verse number 34 shows that of the practice of developing mindfulness. So you need to see the faults of indulging in negative actions, and then when you are about to create or do something negative, you need to show mindfulness. Never should I look around distractedly for no purpose with a resolute mind. I should always keep my eyes downwards. In order to relax and gaze, verse number 36, in order to relax the gaze for a short while, I should look around, and if someone appears in my field of vision, I should look at him and say, welcome. So when you are distracted, when your mind is distracted so that you are drawn towards those things which could cause attachment, desirous attachment, I mean, you need to avoid them. And so the monks and nuns are advised not to poke their nose in other people's, and in the business, I mean, other people's business which give rise to these negative emotions. So these are talking about reality. And so in order to relax yourself, to check if there is any danger on the path, I should look again and again in the 4 directions. So to rest, I should turn my head around and then look behind me. And so you should not be stubborn when you keep the monastic vows, although it is said that you should look, I mean, your eyes should gaze downwards while you're walking. But when there are some risk to your life, I mean, in the areas where you walk, then you should look around, not be stubborn. Having examined both, so when you rest, so whatever you have done before, I mean, they should not give rise to any kind of conceptions or preconceptions of the thought, but just relax. It's teaching. And so verse number 39 says, then periodically I should look to see how the body is being maintained. So here you should actually check, I mean, when you sit in a meditation with this posture called the 7 postures of Nirvairochana, having sat in that posture, I mean, with these features, I mean, you should be mindful of them, and then from time to time check whether you are in that position or not. With the utmost effort, I should check to see that crazed elephant of my mind is not wandering off. And so if you are looking to actually working for developing, to develop single-pointed concentration, and you need always to be vigilant whether you are, and also mindful. So mindfulness is focusing on the object that you have chosen for your meditation, and then vigilance or introspection is being checking within your mind whether you are being mindful or not, and getting distracted, or there is mental laxity falling on the mind or not. And then if you are doing a meditation on the nature of the mind, you should focus on this mere quality of the mind, having that of awareness and clarity. And so that has to be your focus. And you should actually single-pointedly focus on the nature of and try to develop that of the shamatha, that of mental quiescence, focused on the mind. And once that becomes stable, then you should go into that of meditation on the nature, the final nature of the mind itself, that of the emptiness nature of the mind. So although this you're advised to do meditation, develop that of concentration and so forth, but it says in verse number 42 that you should also check whether there are risks or not in the place where you are, or you should not just say that you are meditating, therefore you should not talk to others. Sometimes you may take others, care about others and talk to them. So however, if I'm unable to do this, when afraid or involved in celebrations, then I should relax. Likewise, it has been taught that at times of giving, one may be neutral or certain aspects of moral discipline. And so here, what is being emphasized is not to harm others. I should undertake whatever deed I have intended to do and think of doing nothing other than this, and other than it. So whatever I need to accomplish, I need to start that first. So it's saying that you should not start something and not finish it, and before finishing that, start another one, so that you never finish any of these works. With my mind applied to that task, I should set about for the time being to accomplish it. By acting in this way, all will be done well, but by acting otherwise, neither action will be done. Likewise, there will be no increase in the proximate disturbing conceptions that come from a lack of alertness. So, verse number 45 also read, so wherever you are going, you should, or whatever you are doing, you should always check whether your mind is tinged with the selfish motive or not. If there is selfish motive, then you should try to overcome it. So if you have some kind of out of selfish motive, sense of gaining something or gaining name, fame, and so forth, gifts and so forth, it advises you to remain like a piece of wood. Verse number 50, and so through your education, through your learning, you need to try to overcome those of the misconceptions or doubts about the realities and so forth. And so for that, you need to develop the understanding based on listening to the teachings, which is not so stable, because you may read something in one book, and then you read another book and it says something else about the topic, then you will be confused. So you just staying with that understanding gained through listening, it will not be sufficient. Therefore, you need to do whatever whatever you have learned. You need to do analysis into it, and you need to read different books and then be able to compare and contrast them, saying, oh, this book says such and such things, that book says such and such things, and what is the reason why they say different things. And so through these four means of reasoning, which is the first one, that of the reason or of evidence, the principle of evidence, and which is based on that of the principle of relationship. Therefore, you can understand that things come on the basis of some independence on other factors, and causes and conditions give rise to their effects and so forth. And then that in turn, why things give rise to some called results or not, is because of their nature. For example, fire has the nature of being hot, water being liquid, and so forth. And then mind having this nature of clarity and awareness, it's its nature. So those who are engaged in study of the Dharma, philosophy, and so forth, and first you engage in listening to the teachings, and you read the books, and then you draw some understanding based on them, which is not so stable. because someone may come and challenge your understanding and you may believe them. But whatever you have heard, you need to actually use these 4 principles of reasoning again and again, called investigating into the teaching. So within the writings, amongst the writings of the ancient Indian masters that we have, we study the Chittamatra books as well as those of the Madhyamaka books, and then those of the Vaibhashikas and Sautantika schools of thought as well, with regard to selflessness here. So those who teach the very subtle selflessness, the theory of selflessness, I mean, how do they point out the logical fallacies within the other systems who teach more coarser understanding of selflessness? You should not say that I'm a Nyingma power, Kajupa and Gelugpa and so forth. You should read the books of all the different Tibetan Buddhist traditions. So it is wrong for the followers of the Shugden spirit, this perfidious spirit, saying that for Gelugpas, they should not, I mean, the Gelugpas should not read Nyingma books. We need to read these different books from the different traditions and then try to find out why there are different interpretations, different teachings. I mean, so that you should be able to actually confirm which one is right, I mean, why the different reasonings that are used and so forth. And through your reasoning, you should come to your conclusion. And then the best thing is to build your experience of the teachings so that your conviction will be very firm. So Master Tsongkhapa says that whatever on the points of that you have, the meaning of the things that you have heard, I mean, may I be able to, by using these 4 principles, day and night, called investigate into the teachings, correctly, I mean, investigate into the teaching, gain this conviction in the teaching. So it is very important for us to do this kind of investigation into teachings. So everyone, whether monastics or lay people, you should read books, you should read these philosophical writings, and it's not just enough to read the books, but you should be able to compare the different interpretations and then gain conviction within yourself. So it is a unique feature of the teaching of the Buddha. The Buddha stated that monks and scholars, just as a gold is tested by a goldsmith for its purity and quality by cutting, rubbing, and burning, likewise you should examine my teaching and then accept it, but not because you have devotion or faith in me. And so what he's saying is that his followers should actually check his teaching well, thoroughly. And then when they find the teaching to be standing to the test of reasoning and also be beneficial, then they should accept, not otherwise. So I do, of course, respect all the religious traditions of the world, but this is something unique to the teaching of the Buddha. So I had discussions with followers of Pali tradition from Thailand, and we talked about the Four Noble Truths and then the 16 characteristics and the 37 harmonies of enlightenment. For explaining and actually proving them, do you actually resort to scriptural citations or use reasoning and logic? And they said they resort to scripture. So when I heard this, I thought that in the second chapter of Pramana Vartika by Dharmakirti, he uses reason to prove the Four Noble Truths and then the 16 aspects of these Four Noble Truths for each of the Four Noble Truths. So this is something amazing. And therefore, this is taught in order to gain a very firm conviction in the teaching of the Buddha, the Four Noble Truths and the 16 aspects, through reason. So verse number 55 on page 43 says, being very resolute and faithful. So it's showing how we should gain conviction in the teaching and then gain faith based on reason, not just saying that, oh, this is the teaching of my Lama, this and that Lama, therefore I must accept it, but you need actually to read the writings of the Lama and then try to gain the understanding of his teaching well, through which you should gain faith in him. So that is the faith called based on reason, not blind faith. And then steady, respectful, polite, with a sense of shame, apprehensive and peaceful. I should strive to make others happy. And so for followers of the Buddha and the followers of Master Shantideva, you have to be someone who actually practices like this. I should not be disheartened by all the whims of the childish who are in discord with one another. I should know them to arise in their minds due to disturbing conceptions, and therefore be kind towards them. In doing that which by nature is not unwholesome, both for the sake of myself and other sentient beings, I should always hold my mind fast, acting like an apparition with no sense of self. So because for us, as beginner-level practitioners, it's very important to have a good health. And so we should really take care of the body and not be sick and so forth. So, but you must not be attached to it by thinking again and again that after a long time I have won the leisure, greatest leisure. Likewise, I should hold my mind as utterly unshakable as the king of mountains. If mind, you are not made unhappy by this body, when this body is dragged and tossed about by vultures greedy for flesh, then why are you so concerned about it now? So this is showing not to be attached to your body. And so we of course think of protecting our body. And there is this sense of mind with regard to the body, and then that it belongs to someone, me. So there is this holding this body as mine. Why mine do you guard it so? Since you and it are separate, what use can it be to you? Why, confused mind, do you hold on to a clean wooden form? Do you not hold on to a clean form? Just what is the point of guarding this putrid, dirt-filled machine? First of all, mentally separate the layers of skin. So this shows this is to the teaching to meditate on the impermanent nature of the body. First of all, mentally separate the layers of skin from the flesh, and then with the scalpel of discrimination, separate the flesh from the skeletal frame, and having split open even the bones, look right down into the marrow while examining this, as you ask yourself, where is its essence? So this body that is considered a precious human body, which is also made up of the flesh, blood and bones, although there's no essence to it, but we should make this life a meaningful, but not out of attachment to it. So verse number 66, 67, and then 68. Now, having paid 69, now having paid my body its wages, I shall engage in making my life meaningful. However, if my body is of no benefit, then I shall not give it anything. I should conceive of my body as a boat, a mere support for coming and going, and in order to benefit all others, transform it into a wish-fulfilling body. So this is not talking about the strength of the body as such, but because the elephants and tigers have much more stronger body than us. Those who are more or less carried away by material development and material amenities and so forth are mostly indulging their senses and with regard to the objects, the sensual objects, and then they, on the basis of that, they draw some kind of a gratification. So there are many Westerners here today. You like lots of entertainments, distractions, listening to music and shows and so forth. You consider them very important. Also, food, good fragrant smell, and beautiful clothes, attires and so forth. So through these, of course, you have physical, sensorial experience of joy. But this is something which even animals can experience. But we have this special brain. So just surviving on the base, based on the sensorial experiences is similar to the animals. But we have something which is separate or different from the animals, which is our brain, this human brain, and therefore we need to draw satisfaction or happiness on the basis of the mind itself and not the sensorial experiences as such. So in other words, we need to seek happiness on the basis of the mind, and therefore it's important to understand psychology, learn the science of mind or emotions. So we are not talking about being Buddhist or anything. I mean, we are talking about just learning what is beneficial to us and to our life. Because in reality, if you have real satisfaction deep in your heart, then you don't need to rely on the external amenities. When I was in Barcelona one time, I met a Christian monk who was living in Barcelona. There is a monastery called Montserrat, and this monk was living as a hermit behind that monastery up in the hills and didn't have good food, just like bread and tea. And so when I met him, I told him that I was told that you have been in your hermitage for 5 years. So what have you been doing? What was your practice? And he said he was meditating love. So when he actually expressed that, there was some kind of a tingling in his eyes as well, twinkling in his eyes. So he was someone who had given up the pleasures based on food, clothing, and so forth. So when he actually told me that he had been meditating on love, I mean, he has a very special expression on his face as well. And so similarly, amongst Tibetans and Ladakhis, people of Ladakh, there are people who actually give up the food, clothing, and so forth, fame and so forth, but they are focused on the meditation, using deep meditation, using their mind, and relying on their mind, mental consciousness more than the sensorial ones. And there is, and therefore, they have a very deep sense of satisfaction and happiness. So this is something that we as human beings, because we have this intelligence, this brain, intelligent brain, we can do this, unlike the animals. So what Shantideva is making point here is that we should not be too attached to the pleasures of to attach to one's own pleasure and so forth, but we need to actually work for the benefit of other sentient beings who are infinite as the expanse of the space. So what we need to actually be able to do is to have a direction as referred by the mantra of Heart Sutra, and to have a goal and direction leading to that. So I should desist from inconsiderately and noisily moving around chairs and so forth, as well as from violent opening doors. I should always delight in humility. Got it. So the text is talking about being humble and consider yourself, regard yourself as disciple or student of others. And when someone does something good, you should praise them and rejoice in their good deed. But if your praise turns out, if there's a risk of turning it out to be like a worldly concern, then you should avoid that. So when someone does something good, you should accordingly praise them. So usually what we do is when somebody does something good, we may say, you did something good, but there's some sense of not really appreciating fully. And then when others praise you for your good deed, you shall not feel arrogant. So you should not let others praise as a cause for one's arrogance and otherwise there are people who come from their homeland without much things, and then once they study philosophy and gain some students and so forth, then they become puffed up. So that must not happen. Holiness. 77. So that was verse number 76, and we are on 77. All deeds of others are the source of joy that would be rare, even if it could brought with money. Therefore, I should be happy in finding this joy in the good things that are done by others. So I shall suffer no. Verse number 78. So what this is teaching is that you should reduce your selfish motive and always try to increase cherishing others over oneself, holding others more dearer, and being able to benefit others. When talking, I should speak, verse number 79, from my heart and on what is relevant. So some people like to talk too much, but then they always have inconsistencies in what they said earlier and later. So you should be able to speak consistently. Because if you are inconsistent in your speech, then others would point that out. I should speak making the meaning clear, so that people have no doubt about what you are talking about. And then also the speech is pleasing, that it should not disturb others' mind. And then it should not be tinged with your desire or hatred, but in gentle tones and in moderation. When beholding someone in my eyes, thinking, I shall fully awaken through depending upon this being, I should look at the person with love and an open heart. And so this is a reference also to the lines or stanzas from the 8 verses of mind training, looking down at yourself as the lowliest and considering others to be higher than you. And so through this, what you actually create is create a circumstance where you are able to practice patience, even if others say something bad to you, always being motivated by great aspiration of being, or being motivated by the remedial forces. If I work in the fields of excellent benefit and misery, great virtues will come about. In verse number 82, right? Endowed with the wisdom and joy, I should undertake all that intent I need to depend upon anyone else in any action that I undertake. The perfections such as generosity are progressively more exalted. The perfections such as generosity are progressively more exalted. So in other words, benefiting others, and in terms of practice, doing practices whereby you want to benefit others, you should actually take the lead over others, not let others lead you as such. So the perfections such as generosity and so forth are progressively more exalted. So you should do practices whereby you are able to make progress further and further. But for a little morality, I should not forsake the great gift. So you should actually check what is more beneficial and less beneficial. And so you should not forsake the greater purpose for something small. And most importantly, it says I should consider what will be of the most benefit for others. When this is well understood, I should always strive for the welfare of others. So because the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are dedicated for the well-being of others, in the Vinaya, the monastic discipline, the monastics are not allowed to touch gold, or because it is considered as going against the vows. But when a very devoted person comes forth to you and offers these precious objects, even though, you should not say that I'm not allowed to touch this because I'm a monk as such, but in order to satisfy that person's wish, you should not have, without any kind of selfish motive and also attachment towards these, there is permission to accept those offerings according to the Bodhisattva Vinaya, Bodhisattva vows. The far-seeing merciful ones have allowed the Bodhisattva to do some actions that for others were forbidden. So this. I should divide my food amongst those who have fallen to lower realms. So as monastics, we are advised to take food in moderation. So there are Christian monastics who are really living very simple life with little want. So there are Hindu masters also who practice austerity, which are very amazing, although their practices are related to this philosophical understanding or idea of Atman or a soul theory. But they really live a very contented and simple life. So, and eat merely what is sufficient for myself. Except for the 3 robes, I may give away all. So these 3 monastic robes are the things that the monastics must keep to themselves. Otherwise, more than what is needed, it has to be given. This body, which is being used for the sacred dharma, so when we are able to use this body, this kind of body with leisure and endowment for the practice of the dharma, you should not neglect your health too much. So you should not be harmed for only slight benefit. By behaving in this way, the wishes of all beings will be quickly fulfilled. So verse number 86 is also showing that the monastics should not do extreme austere practices. Verse number 87. So until you reach such a point where you can actually, you have control over your life and death. I mean, it is said that those who lack the pure intention of compassion should not give their body away. Instead, both in this and future lives, they should give it to the cause of fulfilling the great purpose. The Dharma should not be explained to those who lack respect, to those who, like sick, wear clothes around their head, to those holding umbrellas, taking weapons, to those with covered hats, nor to a woman accompanied by a man. So, of course, as Buddhists, we should not go about, around places to teach Buddhism to everyone. If you meet with some Christians, you should talk according to their practice and their tradition, and to the Muslims also according to their practice and tradition. And although I should always pay equal respect to the dharmas of the lesser and higher beings, so we should respect. What this says is that if even to the Christians or Muslims, because their religion is also helping others, serving others and helping others, therefore we should respect them. I should not communicate the dharma of a lesser being to one who is a vessel for the vast dharma. So someone who really has a good intellect and who is bright can understand the dharma. If you just tell them to sit there and meditate and do some recitation of prayers, that's wrong. I must not forsake the Bodhisattva way of life, nor mislead others by means of sutras or tantras. So many of us do engage in rituals of reciting mantras or reading scriptures, but without being able to really make any transformation within yourself. We go to some congregation, say prayers, and then go to homes of villagers and to do some prayers and rituals, and then gossip with them as well. I mean, those will not really be helpful to make any spiritual transformation within oneself and others. I have a story to tell here. So one Tibetan went back to Tibet to meet his relatives and others, and came back and told me that he started teaching some people in his hometown, and he even taught some of the people in the village philosophy and debate. And then the monks in the local monastery did not actually have that kind of learning of philosophy as such. And then the lay people who had learned some philosophy and debate asked them some questions. And the monks had no answer. And so these monks have told this monk who came to me that the lay people must not be taught philosophy and all this, because they really put us to shame. And so this is the reference, like doing some rituals and reading scriptures and so forth without really understanding. And so this is called misleading by means of sutras and tantras. When I spit or throw away the stick for cleaning my teeth, I should cover it with earth. Also, it is shameful to urinate and so forth in water or on land used by others when eating. And so these are taught in the Vinaya. When eating, I should not fill my mouth, eat noisily or with my mouth wide open. I should not sit cross my legs outstretched, nor rub my hands together. So this is like called acting like those of the wrestlers, where they would I should not sit alone in vehicles, upon beds, nor in the same room with the So when you sleep, you should actually have this intention to rise up early in the morning. And so with that kind of intention, if you go to sleep, then you'll be able to get up early. So of course you need enough sleep, like 7 or 8 hours of sleep. But when you go to bed, so there are these 4 mental factors, as they are called, which are said to be variables: sleep, regret, and then what are known as analysis and investigation. These are mental factors which can either become positive or negative or neutral according to the mental state that you were earlier. So if you went to sleep with a positive state of mind, then your sleep itself also turns out to be positive. Whereas if you have negative thoughts, then the sleep also will turn out to be negative. So verse number 100. So whatever you do, whether you are walking, sleeping, resting, or sleeping, when your motivation is to always help and benefit others more than oneself, whatever you have, your possessions, your body, your resources, and so forth, your merits, the positive spiritual merits, and so forth, you dedicate for the well-being of others. then this is the case, as it is said in verse number 100, there is no such thing as something that is not learned by a bodhisattva. Thus, if I am skilled in living in this way, nothing will be non-meritorious. So for such a practice, of course, you need to have a spiritual master. Whatever directly or indirectly, I should not do anything that is not for the benefit of others. Solely for the sake of sentient beings, I should dedicate everything towards awakening. And so the master should be someone who is learned in the three pitaka, the three baskets, and also have the experience of keeping and observing the precepts, whether you are layperson with vows or monastics, or you may be someone who has kept all the three types of vows, the pratimoksha vows, which comes in the Vinaya, and then the bodhisattva and tantric vows. So never, even at the cost of my life, should I forsake a spiritual friend who is who is wise in the meaning of the great vehicles and who is a great bodhisattva practitioner. So that's the meaning. I should practice entrusting myself to my spiritual master in the manner taught in the biography of Sri Sambhava. This and other advice spoken by the Buddha I can understand through reading the sutras. I should read the sutras because it is from them that the practices appear. So in Tibetan, there are over 100 volumes of the words of the Buddha that are translated into Tibetan, and over 200 volumes of the commentaries written by Indian masters. So these are the texts that we must read and study. So the Buddha gave his teaching for us to follow it, and then the commentarial exegesis are written for understanding the Buddha's teaching for us. To begin with, I should look at the Sutra of Agashagarbha. But why? Because in addition, I should definitely read the compendium of all the practices again and again, because what is to be constantly practiced is very well and extensively shown there. I should also sometimes look at the condensed compendium of all sutras, as I said earlier. This is the text that Master Shantideva has written. And I should make an effort to study the works of the same two titles composed by the exalted Nagarjuna. So it is sometimes said that Master Nagarjuna's text was, of course he wrote it, but it was not translated into Tibetan. So it is said that there is also a compendium of all the practices written by Nagarjuna, which was not translated into Tibetan. So it is also said that of the two titles given above, the Compendium of Practices and Compendium of all Sutras, we should also read Nagarjuna's Compendium of all Sutras. And then the next verse, the unique course of developing introspection is shown here. I should do whatever is forbidden in those works, and when I see a practice there, I should impeccably put into practice in order to guard the minds of worldly people. The defining characteristic of guarding alertness, in brief, is only this. So with regard to the practice, I usually say that the teaching of the Buddha is about, when it comes to the conduct, it's not harming others. And then the philosophical view of Buddhism is that of dependent origination. So the practice of not harming others is also practiced by other followers of other religious traditions, such as Jainism. They're really incredibly dedicated to this practice. So all the religious traditions have this practice because they have the practice of love and compassion. But the uniqueness of the teaching of the Buddha is his teaching of dependent origination. And then we also come across the teachings of the subtlety, the degrees of subtlety within the mind. There is a gross or coarser levels of mind, and then subtle, and then subtlest ones. So of course, regarding this body, I mean, our body comes from our parents, the semen or the ovum and the sperm. But if we trace the beginning, I mean, there's no beginning to the basic building block of the body itself. The basic material of the body itself has no beginning as such. And similarly, with regard to the mind, with regard to the substantial cause, the principle, the cause of the mind or consciousness, there's no beginning to it at all, because something that is not mind cannot be a substantial cause of mind or consciousness as such. So, for example, we can. The eye consciousness or visual consciousness that we have has its own substantial cause, which is a previous moment of consciousness, or the eye visual consciousness and so forth, whereas it can have cooperative conditions like the eye organ or the faculty, the sense, visual faculty and so forth. So the mere fact that this visual consciousness arises in the aspect of awareness, having awareness and clarity, is because of a previous moment of clarity and awareness. So on the basis of this understanding, then in Buddhism, we also talk about rebirth. In the non-Buddhist traditions, they usually talk about past and future lives with reference to an Atman that is unchanging from one life to the next, and it goes from one life to the next. But in Buddhism, we talk about the subtle consciousness going from one life to the next life. So with regard to these degrees of subtlety, we can talk about them because we have a state of mind which during the waking state, which is coarse, and then there is a mind at the level of dreaming, which is subtler than the waking state mind, and then there's still subtler state of mind when we go into deep sleep, which is subtler than the dreaming mind. And then, on the basis of this understanding of the substantial cause, which has a similar, aspect to the next moment of a mind, we can talk about this on the basis of this, that there are all these degrees of subtlety and aspects of mind. So verse number 109 of this chapter finished. So sixth chapter on patience, which is a very important practice, is taught in this chapter. So with regard to patience, there is patience of not being annoyed by those causing harm to you, and those also accepting, patience accepting one's misery and patience of gaining certainty into the reality of things. So you should first think about the pros and cons of the practices. What is the benefit of doing these practice of patience and so forth, and what are those factors which actually are opposed to these practices? So we also do check the way the profit that we can make or not, and when we do some business. So similarly, in the case of this kind of spiritual practice, the opposing factor of patience or tolerance is hatred or anger. And so this text begins by mentioning the faults of anger. So whatever wholesome deeds, such as venerating the Buddhas and generosity that have been amassed over 1,000 eons, will all be destroyed in one moment of anger. So all these all kinds of wholesome practices that we have done over a long period of time are destroyed by a moment of anger. Of course, this is something very obscure knowledge to us. But anger is something that on the immediate level destroys our own peace of mind. If you look at a dog who is always angry and it's never happy, so you can never be happy with anger unless you are really a stupid person. Nobody will say that today I was really happy because I was so angry. Of course, they may say that today I got so angry that I fought with somebody, and take that to be something called positive. But anger always brings about unhappiness, and it'll destroy your physical health as well. Medical scientists say this these days. And neuroscientists say that basic human nature is compassionate. So even scientists today, medical scientists, say this: if you're constantly angry, then your immune system also is weakened, and it depletes the immune system. So therefore, anger is something that is really bad for your health as well. So these are the things that experiences that we can actually see. So there's not much meaning in if we say that attachment will destroy our virtues, but anger will destroy the positive or wholesome deeds that we do, which may give rise to positive consequences. So there's no transgression like hatred, and no fortitude like patience. Thus I should strive in various ways to meditate on patience. And so the obvious faults that we can actually see of anger or hatred are mentioned in verse number 3. My mind will not experience peace if it fosters painful thoughts of hatred. So you will always be disturbed with anger. I shall find no joy or happiness. Unable to sleep, I shall feel unsettled. A master who has hatred is in danger of being killed, even by those who, for their wealth and happiness, depend upon the master's kindness. By it, friends and relatives are disheartened. Though drawn by my generosity, they will not trust me. In brief, there's nobody who lives happy with anger. So hence the enemy anger creates suffering such as these. But whoever assiduously overcomes it finds happiness now and hereafter. So what are the causes that gives rise to anger within yourself? In order to fight anger, you need to actually know what causes anger. Having found its fuel of mental unhappiness in the prevention of what I wish for and in doing what I do not want, hatred increases and then destroys me. So to those near and dear ones, we are happy when they get praise or when they get gifts and honor and so forth. Whereas those whom we consider as our enemies or adversaries, when they get praise, we are unhappy. Therefore, I should totally eradicate the fuel of this enemy, for this enemy so unhappiness is the thing that you need to avoid. Annoyance or like frustration. Because when something bad happens to your near and dear ones, you are unhappy. When something bad happens to those so-called enemies, you are happy. Therefore, I should totally eradicate the fuel. If this enemy has no further function than that of causing me harm. Whatever befalls me, I shall not disturb my mental joy. For having been made unhappy, I shall not accomplish what I wish, and my virtues will decline. Why be unhappy about something if it can be remedied? And what is the use of being unhappy? So all these negative emotions start from a small experience that provokes you those negative emotions, like anger and so forth. And then, as you get more and more used to it, they increase further. So, of course, anger itself, by itself, cannot harm others as such, although out of anger you may go to the length of killing somebody as also. So whatever befalls me, I shall not disturb my mental joy. And verse number 9 read. And verse number 10, why be unhappy about something? This is like summarizing the point. So if something unfortunate or some misfortune befalls you, if there is a way to come out of it, you should not be unhappy. You should put effort to overcome it. But if it has no other way to come about, then there's no use to being unhappy. So what is the use of being unhappy about something if it cannot be remedied? For myself and for my friends, I want no suffering. So for myself and for yourself and so your own near and dear ones, you don't want suffering, no disrespect, no harsh words, and nothing unpleasant. But for my enemies, it is the opposite. The cause of unhappiness, the happiness sometimes occurs, but the causes for suffering are frequent. So if you really acknowledge suffering as suffering, then you will work to overcome suffering, otherwise not. So even the animals, when they find when they actually see the risk to their life, then they are aware of it, otherwise not. So if you know what suffering is, then you will try to work to overcome it. Without suffering, there's no renunciation. Therefore, my mind, you should stand firm. If, as some ascetics and the people of Karnapa endure the pain of cuts and burns for no reason, there's nothing that whatsoever that is not made easier through acquaintance. So through becoming acquainted with small harms, I should learn to patiently accept the greater harms. So if you question that, of course I cannot practice this and that, I cannot overcome suffering and so forth. I mean, this is the advice that is given in the verse number 14. So if you only think about, I mean, if you have suffering and just caught up in that suffering, I mean, then it'll not be, you'll not be able to overcome it. But if you think that this suffering has come as a result of my previous negative karma, I mean, the mental suffering will be reduced. So I should not be impatient with heat and cold and wind, rain, sickness, bondage, and beatings. For if I am, the harm they cause me will increase. Some, when they see their own blood, become especially brave and steady, but some, when they see the blood of others, faint and fall unconscious. Verse number 18 also read, these reactions come from the mind. So this chapter on patience is very important because it is related to the practice that comes in the 8th chapter on the meditation, and the cultivation of Bodhisattva through equaling and exchanging self and others. So this lays the foundation for practicing that, cultivating that of the Bodhisattva based on the equaling and exchanging oneself and others. So anger is the opposition or opposite force, opposite to that of patience or tolerance. So even those without any religious belief should think about this, give thought to this. Because if you have a problem, it cannot be overcome by anger at all, but you should be calm. And then you should actually overcome those. I mean, you should try to have not to have those who provoke anger as such. So when we have problems in the world today, people use force. How can you actually overcome these problems by force? By using violence. So in order to overcome this problem of violence, we need to work so that gradually people can overcome their hatred or animosity. And so violence, it's very difficult for violence to overcome violence. So in the world we talk about blessing in disguise. So when you have some kind of misfortune, you sometimes consider it as a blessing in disguise. And so when we have problems, if we could say that, I mean, feel that it is a result of our own negative karmas, and think that, I mean, through this suffering, that the negativities that I've created will be purified. And when you suffer, if you could also further think that may all this suffering of sentient beings, such as animals undergoing suffering and so forth, ripen upon me, that also helps you. So this could actually, with this kind of attitude, you could also actually have courage to suffer for other sentient beings. And whatever happiness and joy and so forth you have, you dedicate them for the well-being of others. I mean, these are really powerful practices. Verse number 19. Even if, when the wise are suffering, their minds remain very lucid and undefiled, for when war is being waged against disturbing conceptions, it is not easy to combat these disturbing conceptions or negative emotions. So, of course, when you combat in a war, I mean, human beings against human beings, it's not easy. You may think of winning over the other, but it's not easy. Much harm is caused at the time of this battle. The victorious warriors are those who, having disregard for all suffering, vanquish the foes of hatred and so forth. Furthermore, suffering has these good qualities. Through being disheartened with it, the arrogance is dispelled. You will not think that you are really somebody special. Compassion arises for those in cyclic existence, because when you acknowledge your own suffering in this samsara, I mean, you will have this kind of compassion towards others who are suffering. Negativity is shunned, and joy is found in virtue. So what you will actually see is the psychophysical aggregates, which are the basis of suffering, and you will be able to have this wish to be out of this kind of state. And then also see the faults of negative emotions which give rise to this. As I do not become angry with great sources of suffering such as jaundice, then why be angry? Why be angry with animate creatures? Then they too are provoked with by conditions. Although they are not wished for, these sickness arise. And likewise, although they are not wished for, these disturbing conceptions forcibly arise. So the misfortunes and unhappiness and so forth that happen to us are come about through conditions. There's none of them arise independently of their own accord as such. Without thinking, I shall be angry. People become angry with no resistance. And without thinking, I shall produce myself. Likewise, anger itself is produced. All mistakes that occur and all the various kinds of wrongdoing arise to the force of conditions. They do not govern themselves. So people showing us anger or disliking us and so forth have their own causes and conditions that give rise to this kind of attitude and thoughts to us. So we are also part of that cause. So we are part of the condition. Therefore, we cannot say or point our fingers towards them saying, oh, they provoked anger and so forth. These conditions that assembled together have no intention to produce anything, and neither does their product have the intention to be produced. So this verse from Mula Madhyamaka Karika of Nagarjuna, Master Nagarjuna, is very important to understand, which says, elimination, through the elimination of the karma and negative emotions, there is liberation. And karma and these negative emotions arise through exaggerated outlook. So these karmas that are created through our attachment and anger, of course, are the results of these negative emotions, attachment and anger. And attachment and anger, which gives rise to, from which these karmas ensue, so those karmas which are created by attachment and anger come from them, and they come from these attachment and anger, and these attachment and anger also arise from exaggerated outlook. Or I know an American scientist, a psychiatrist named Aaron Beck, who has treated people with psychiatric problems, and particularly with anger. And so he was not a religious person, but a scientist. So when I met him, he told me when someone who is angry feels anger at someone else or something, that thing or the person at which or with which the person is angry appears to be absolutely negative. But then 90% of that negativity that is perceived is the person's own mental perception. And so this is exactly what Master Nagarjuna is saying when he says karma and these delusions arise from the conceptual thought or this exaggerated outlook, which are called inappropriate mentation. So karma and delusions arise from inappropriate mentation. So in Buddhist texts, it's said that attachment and karma and delusions arise from these inappropriate mentations. And these inappropriate mentations, so karma and delusions arise from inappropriate mentation, and this inappropriate mentation itself arises so what happens to us is when we see something that we dislike or which is unattractive or to us, I mean, this inappropriate mentation kind of exaggerates that in aspect, and then we become angry or become attached. And so these inappropriate mentations themselves are based on this the appearance that things have some kind of independent existence in them, and this grasping at independent existence gives rise to this inappropriate mentation. So I have told some of my friends to do some research into the scientists, the quantum physicists, for example, who say that things have no objective existence, and those quantum physicists who really are fully convinced that there is no objective existence in things, perhaps their negative emotions, they have less negative emotions because of this kind of experience. So I do think that it makes difference in their own experience dealing with the world. And so although scientists, the quantum physicists themselves do not use this understanding of non-objective existence in things to combat or to as an opposing force to counteract our negative emotions as such, but I do think that there is difference. So Kuna Lama Rinpoche, from whom I have received teaching on the Madhyamaka Karika, also have told me that in the verse, it says that the final line, which says, according to the Sanskrit original, can be, I mean, there are two different understandings that readings that you can have in the Sanskrit. One is saying that this grasping at true existence or the fabrication is ended by emptiness. And so the wisdom realizing emptiness is serving as the agent to combat or to counter our self-grasping, grasping at some true existence. And on the other hand, the Sanskrit version can also be read to mean that these fabrications, which are the basis of our inappropriate mentation, can dissolve within the nature of the mind itself. verse number 27 on page 57. So the ancient Nalanda masters, the scholars, I mean, their understanding and their intellect, also understanding of the teachings, developed further because of challenges from non-Buddhist scholars. And so, the non-Buddhist scholars also benefited from the Buddhist challenges from the Buddhist side. So here the primal factor is reference to this philosophical tradition assertion of the Sankhya school. And so in this philosophical school, they talk about 25 factors, and this primal substance is the source of all other factors or things that exist except that of the conscious being. And so, and that which is imputed as self. And self, according to the non-Buddhist schools, is said to be something which is permanent, which is single, and also autonomous, not dependent on others. Since they are not unproduced, do not arise after having purposely thought, I shall arise in order to cause harm. If they are unproduced and non-existent, then what wish they have to produce, since this self would permanently apprehend its object, it follows that it would never cease again. Furthermore, if the self were permanent, it would clearly be devoid of action and like space. So even if it met with other conditions, how could its unchanging nature be affected? Even if, when acted upon by conditions, it remains as before, then what could actions do to it? So, hence, everything is governed. Verse number 31 on page 58. Says everything is governed by other factors, which in turn are governed by others. And in this way, nothing governs itself. So, for example, suffering comes from its own conditions, and those causes and conditions also have their own causes and conditions that precede them. Having understood this, I should not be angry with phenomena which are like apparition. If everything is unreal, like an apparition, then who is there to restrain what anger? Surely, in this case, restraint would be inappropriate. It would not be inappropriate because conventionally I must maintain that independence upon restraining anger, the stream of suffering is severed. So although things are like illusion, still they affect us. So when one sees an enemy or even a friend committing an improper action, by thinking that such things arise through condition, I shall remain in a happy frame of mind. So of course things have no independent objective existence as such, but conventionally still we can say that they do exist, can't we? So verse number 32, right? Verse number 33, 34. If things were brought into being by choice, then since no one wishes to suffer, suffering would not occur to any embodied creatures. This is true, he solemnly says. Verse number 37. So out of anger, people actually commit suicide. If such things can also happen, people will even kill their treasured selves. How can they be expected not to cause harm to the bodies of other living beings? Even if I cannot develop compassion for all such people who, through the arisal of disturbing emotions, set out to try and kill me and so forth, the last thing I should do is to become angry with them. So some of my friends have told me that when there are so much negative things done towards the teaching of the Buddha and also towards their friends and practitioners and so forth, I mean, they are not disturbed by them to the extent of becoming angry, but in fact they feel compassion towards those perpetrators. "39. Even if it were nature of childish to cause harm to others, I would still incorrect to be angry with them, for this would be like begrudging fire for having the nature of to burn. And even if the faults were temporary and they, who are by nature reliable, it would still be incorrect to be angry, for this would be like begrudging space for allowing smoke to arise." And verse number 41 also finished. So you actually see that you have a role in all this suffering. Verse number 47. "Having been instigated by my own actions, those who cause me harm come into being. If by these actions they should fall into hell, surely isn't it I who am destroying them? In dependence upon them, I purify my transgressions by patiently accepting the harms that they cause, but in dependence upon me, they will fall into the hellish pain for a very long time." So when someone does something unduly bad to us, I mean, they are creating negative karma, and therefore there's no reason why you should feel angry at them instead of being compassionate. And the people who cause us harm are the objects of the practice of compassion. So anger, its direct antidote is that of patience. And therefore, those who provoke anger in us are like the causes for practicing patience, and therefore they are like our spiritual teachers. So nevertheless, should I return the harm, it will not protect them either. By doing so, my conduct will deteriorate, and hence this fortitude will be destroyed. So external factors will never be able to destroy us. It's the internal enemy, the negative emotions, which destroy us. Since my mind is not physical, in no way can anyone destroy it. But through its being greatly attached to my body, it is cause harm by physical suffering. Since disrespect, harsh speech, and unpleasant words do not cause any harm to my body, why, mind, do you become so angry? Because others will dislike me, but since it will not devour me, either in this or in another life, why do I not want this life? Because it will hinder my worldly gain. Even if I do not want this, I shall have to leave this worldly gain behind, and my wrongdoing alone will remain unmoved. So when others despise you or criticize and so forth, they actually cause others to lose their favor to us. So verse number 63 is the answer to that. Verse number 64. '66 on page 64. '67. '68. '69. '70. '71. So when you meet with the provocations for anger, you need to think from various angles. You need to make sure that these negative emotions, such as attachment and anger, which arise through or from that of the inappropriate mentation, doesn't occur within your mind. '71 read, '72 on page 65. If I am unable to enjoy even the mere suffering of the present, then why do I not restrain myself from being angry, which will be the source of hellish misery? For the sake of satisfying my desires, I have suffered numerous burnings in hell, but though by those actions I neither fulfilled the purpose of myself nor others. Yet now, since great meaning will accrue from harm, which is not even a fraction of that, I should indeed be solely joyful towards such suffering that dispels the harms of all. Should someone else find joyous happiness in praising my enemy as an excellent person, why mind? Do I not praise him too, and likewise make yourself happy? That joyous happiness of yours would be a source of joy, not something prohibited, a precept given by the Excellent One, and a supreme means for assembling others. So this refers to the practice of despising others and the praising oneself. So these will not help if you become angry at those whom you at the praise of those who you dislike, and become happy for despising them. I mean, it doesn't help. Verse number 80, when you see the prosperity of others, you become angry. I mean, there's no point in that. Having generated the mind of awakening through wishing all beings to be happy, why should I become angry if they find some happiness in themselves? Ketu. We stop at verse number 86. His Holiness read that, let alone not having any remorse about the wrongs that you committed or mind. Why do you wish to compete with others who have committed meritorious deeds? Then the information that never